Hey guys, DC Network here, coming at you with another video. A few weeks back, we took a look at the original 10 Ben 10 aliens during pre-production on the channel. I'll leave a card up above to that video if you haven't seen it yet. But in that video, I discussed how there's a lot more to Ben 10's pre-production story than just those 10 aliens, and I was hoping to go over that in another video, and today is that day. So without further ado, let's get into everything else that happened during Ben 10's pre-production, because the show was actually pretty different from what we got in the final product. So Ben 10 was originally pitched to Cartoon Network during a meeting with Man of Action. Man of Action had a wide variety of ideas that they were pitching to the channel, and Cartoon Network happened to focus on Ben 10 being the one that they wanted to move forward with. Originally, Ben 10 was actually called Ben to the 10th before being changed to Force 10, and later Ben 10 obviously, which is the final name that we got in the final iteration of the show. And Ben 10 also as well had a lot of different ideas for what the show would be about. So as we all know, in the final product, Ben has a device that he uses to transform into different aliens, but did you know that this device, being the Omnitrix, was originally called the megawatt? And instead of transforming Ben into different aliens, the megawatt would actually trade places with different Bens from the multiverse. So essentially, the Ben that we all know in our universe would disappear in favor of another version of Ben from somewhere else in the multiverse taking his place. And as you can see on screen now, here's some concept art from Steve E. Gordon, presumably when it was the idea that Ben would switch places with himself across the multiverse, because obviously, as you can see here, all of the heroes we see on screen are not aliens. They are humanoid heroes that presumably are the different versions of Ben throughout the multiverse. As we can see from their designs, there is a fire one, which essentially is, Heat Blast. There's an aquatic one, which obviously his spot was taken by Ripjaws when they switched ideas to go for aliens instead of different heroes. There's one in a shadowy outfit, presumably Ghost Freak, and so on and so on. So yeah, obviously this is quite different from the final product that we got when Ben 10 actually came out. And what's kind of funny, if you guys look at the one at the top that's really big, he kind of reminds me of Eon. You guys remember Eon from Ben 10 Race Against Time? Is it just me, or does that look like a precursor to what we eventually got in that movie being Eon? Anyway, so with that initial idea for the Omnitrix being called the megawatt, Duncan Rolu was doing different sketches of the device and how it would be a dimensional gateway to different parts of the multiverse to pull these different Bens out. And apparently initially this dimensional gateway was actually inside of Ben's chest, and the creatures would come out of his chest. Apparently Joe Kelly thought that the design was really cool, but it would be too freaky for kids, so that's why they scrapped that idea. Later on, they decided to make the Omnitrix into a belt. Eventually it turned into a 10-sided die, so that whenever Ben would throw the dice down, a random alien or a random hero would appear from the dice. But Cartoon Network wasn't a fan of that idea because they thought it was way too random, and they wanted Ben to actually be able to choose which aliens he would transform into, which obviously is kind of interesting because in the final show that we got, Ben a lot of times is trying to choose one alien, but he ends up going for a completely different one that he wasn't intending to transform into. So it seems like Man of Action won that battle in keeping the randomness, or at least maybe not keeping it completely. Instead of having it be 100% random, Ben had some idea of who he was choosing, but sometimes things wouldn't exactly work out the way he wanted them to. Another idea that was present during pre-production was that the idea for Kevin Levin was actually pretty different from what we got in the final version of the show, but actually strikingly similar to the Kevin 11 that we got in the reboot. So initially Kevin was created as a nemesis for Ben, who would have had his own Omnitrix that would transform him into 11 different supervillains instead of 10 different heroes, with apparently Kevin having the catchphrase saying "this one goes up to 11," which is something that was present in the Ben 10 reboot, which is rather fascinating to see that this idea was something that they originally wanted to do for Kevin in the original series, but for one reason or another, they decided to scrap it in favor of Kevin having the power to absorb different materials and whatnot. But they later went back to this in the reboot, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in the reboot, the episode that introduces Kevin Levin's Omnitrix, whatever his watch is called in the reboot, it's actually called "this one goes up to 11." So they even kept that phrasing that they had planned all the way back in the early 2000s and used it in the late 2010s in the Ben 10 reboot. And just a quick side note about this, as you guys know from watching the channel, I am not a fan of the Ben 10 reboot at all whatsoever, but there's one idea from the reboot that I actually really liked a lot, and I talked about this a long time ago, probably in the late 2010s, 2018, 2019 about the show, but I really did like that they had Kevin kind of be the opposite of Ben. They had him having his own Omnitrix, his own device to transform him into aliens, and they were all kind of like different variations of the aliens that Ben had. I really like that idea conceptually, and it's kind of cool to see that it was something that was present all the way back in this draft of Ben 10 before they even were going to transform into aliens. This was at the point where they were still transforming into superheroes. So yeah, that's pretty cool to see. So anyways, after this in development, they decided to scrap the whole idea of going to do superheroes, and they wanted to go do aliens instead. So they brought on Steve E. Gordon to design a bunch of different aliens for Ben, and those were the 10 designs that we went over in my last video discussing Ben 10's pre-production. So again, if you haven't seen that yet, be sure to check it out in the card above. But the one design I didn't go over in that video was the original design for the Omnitrix, at least one of the early designs I should say for the Omnitrix. As we saw in that video, initially it looked like a parasite device on Ben's arm, and this is the first image we have of it actually looking like a watch. And as you can see with this image here, and just in general with Ben 10's pre-production, originally the colors for Ben, instead of being green, the main color for Ben was going to be orange. And I'm kind of curious, because we don't have any sort of inkling as to when this changed or why this changed, but I'm kind of curious why they changed the main color of the show from orange to green, because obviously green is present all throughout Ben 10 in the 4 series that we got in the original continuity and the reboot as well. So if we fast forward a little bit, after Steve Gordon made his designs for the original 10 aliens that were passed on, they ended up bringing on Dave Johnson, who is the man who was in charge of the designs that we got in the final product, the final version of the show. And I'm going to flash up some designs here of the different characters in Ben 10 from this early point of development. Here we have Ben Tennyson. Obviously you can see the different variations of Ben here, nothing too crazy to go off of. Then we have an image with Grandpa Max and Gwen. You can see the different variations of the design. I actually really like the Grandpa Max that is behind Gwen with the mustache and glasses. That design just looks really good to me, and I love the Max that they went with obviously, but that's a really cool design as well. Then we have some designs for the final aliens that we ended up getting in the show, but they're pre-production designs, if you will. So here is Diamond Head, and what you can notice from this image is obviously the original Diamond Head is up front, the one that we got in the final product, but then behind him are 3 other versions of Diamond Head. The one on the left and the one on the bottom right aren't too different from the final Diamond Head that we got, except for some subtle design changes here and there with the different spikes in his back and where the Omnitrix was located on his torso. But the one on the top right, if you notice his chest, that is a very different Omnitrix symbol from what we got in the final version of the show. And honestly, I really like that design, and I'm kind of curious what the Omnitrix itself looked like when that design was present. I'm curious to see what it looked like on Ben's wrist, because I really do like that design, that iconography that they're using here on Diamond Head. And as we move forward to the other aliens, you can see here with Forearms as well, that same iconography is present on his shoulders. So this looks like it got pretty far in development, because these are close to the final versions of these aliens. So it looks like that was one of the final designs for the Omnitrix symbol, but obviously they abandoned it for the design that we all know and love. But I'm curious to see what more of this looked like. What did this watch look like? Why did they abandon this design? Because personally, I think it looks really, really cool. Next up, we have Gray Matter, and as you can see here, the bottom 2 are pretty similar to the Gray Matter that we got, but the top 2 are actually a very different look for Gray Matter. As you can see, that Omnitrix symbol I mentioned before on Forearms and Diamond Head is also present on Gray Matter's head, and you can see Gray Matter is actually drastically different looking in this design here. He definitely looks more creepy in my opinion than the Gray Matter we got in the final product. Next up, we have Heat Blast, which you can see here that these designs for Heat Blast, every single one of them is pretty different from the Heat Blast that we got, and each of them have that other Omnitrix symbol on their body. They do not have the final Omnitrix symbol that we ended up getting in the final iteration of the show. Interestingly enough, it looks like the one in the middle had Accelerate's mask on Heat Blast, so maybe that's a design element they ended up abandoning for Heat Blast and later giving to Accelerate. Next up, we have Stinkfly, which as you can see here, all of these designs are pretty drastically different from the Stinkfly that we got in the final version, but 2 of them have that triangular Omnitrix symbol on them. So again, this is definitely a design that got pretty deep into development. Next up, we have Wild Mutt, and as you can see, these designs are pretty similar to the Wild Mutt that we got in the final product, but again, that Omnitrix design that forms a triangle is present on these pre-production Wild Mutt designs. And last but not least, we have Accelerate, and Accelerate seems to be very similar to the Accelerate we got in the final version. This is the one design out of the bunch I'm showing you that doesn't have that triangular Omnitrix symbol present, so presumably at this point in development that was abandoned in favor of going for the Omnitrix design that we got in the final version of the show. But yeah, that's pretty much all we have for Ben 10's pre-production. There is, of course, the original series test footage, but that's just, the pilot of the show. Obviously, that's going to be a little bit different from the final version, but this is all we have from pre-production, from stuff that was meant to be behind the scenes, but somehow has gotten out into the internet for us to all look at. Let me know down in the comment section below what you guys think about all this. What do you guys think about Ben 10's pre-production process? And what do you think about the fact that originally Ben was going to transform into different versions of himself from across the multiverse, these different superheroes? And let me know what you guys think about that triangular Omnitrix symbol that we see present on a lot of the pre-production versions of our final aliens. Do you agree with me and think that looks really cool? I think honestly they could have gone with that for the final design and I would not have complained at all. Not saying I dislike the design that we got, but that looks so cool to me. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to see more content like this from DC Network. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.